Happy Maker Monday, guys. So a lot of you have been asking me to show this technique because I keep hinting at it, but then I just forget to tell you how. So we're going to talk about how to English paper piece by machine. So English paper piecing has had this huge revival for the last few years, right? And part of what brought this up was Rebecca and I are challenging each other to make the same pattern, but she's going to do it her way and I'm going to do it my way, and then we can compare notes and we can show people that there's lots of ways to get there. So that's always my thing with quilting, right? There's not one answer to anything. There's lots of ways to accomplish the thing you want to do. I tell people all the time, people come in the store and they're like, oh, I'm not patient enough to quilt. Yeah, quilters aren't patient. That's why we've come up with every possible way to do this that does not involve the way they did it 100 years ago. We want to make it look like they did, but we want to do it faster and we want to do it more accurately and we want to get it done so we can start the next thing. So I like to take my paper pieces and put them together by machine for two reasons. One, it goes faster. Two, I like to do lots of things by hand. Piecing is just not one of them. Quilting is not one of them either. Like, I've done it, but it is not my jam. There are people out there that are much better at that than me, and they're the ones that should show you how to do that. Okay? So we're going to show you some steps. Now, I have shown you guys lots of things about EPP. I have shown you guys lots of things, ways to use print and piece fuse. That's what I'm going to use. So like Rebecca's doing her project old school way with cardstock and needle and thread and a thimble and all that stuff. I'm doing the same project. We didn't talk about fabric or anything. I'm going to do the same project with fabric that I've picked out, with print and piece and by machine. And then we're going to compare notes. That's going to be a little bit later because, of course, she's further ahead than I am because she works on it at home and I don't, yeah, when I get home at night, I cross stitch. I don't paper piece. However, I'm going to show you quick steps with working with the print and piece because we've talked about this before. So if you want to know more details about this, I'm not going to talk too much about that. Print and piece fuse. So there's print and piece, which is great for foundation piecing. There's print and piece fuse. The only difference is they're the same product. One is fusible and one is not. The fusible one is the one that you want for English paper piecing or applique. That's another thing I need to teach you guys is how to make needle turn applique not make you crazy. So you can use this for needle turn applique and it's brilliant. I also use this for needle turned applique in the machine. So I'm going to show you how to do that too in a later day. So we're going to talk paper piecing. So what I did was I took the shapes from this pattern here. This is Hex on the Beach by Tula Pink. These are the papers that come in this project. There's no reason you can't do this technique with this paper. Is it harder to pull the papers out when you machine stitch through them? So that's something to take into consideration if you want to do this technique. You may not want to use the papers that come in the pattern. You might just want to use the shape. Because if you're going to use the print and piece, the beauty of the print and piece is that you make one copy of your shapes and then you print it. So you can run it through your printer. You can run it through a copier. If you take it to Kinko's and you want to get copies made, make sure they know that there's fuse on there and they need to run it through the feeder. And so only one sheet comes through at a time. I print this on my laser printer all the time. Works great. So what I did was I took one shape, I drew it out, I copied it, and I pasted it next to each other in a way that it made this sort of honeycomb thing. Had I been thinking, and what I've done in the past is actually take out the margins and butt them up to each other, because then you only have to cut one line between here and there. I wasn't thinking. So another thing I'm going to show you today, these are a pair of scissors by Kai. I love Kai scissors, especially for just regular shears and just typical cutting. These are very straightforward. They're always sharp. I like the tip. This is just a really good size for cutting these out. These are the 5.5 inch size scissors, and we're just going to use the scissors to cut these out on the line. Super simple. I usually cut out multiple rows at once, and all you're going to do is just cut it right on the line. Okay, so I'm going to cut my shapes out, and then we're going to talk about pressing these on. Okay. Okay, so next I'm going to give you some tips on pressing. This is going to be my fabric for my, I'm going to alternate these. So we're just going to make a typical little grandmother's flower garden with a centerpiece and then 6 outside pieces. So my green is going to be every other color. I've got my shapes cut out. When you put this in the light, you'll see that one side has sparkles on it, one side is kind of shimmery. That's the side that goes on the back side of your fabric. Okay, so I just lay these out and make sure that I have a 1/2 inch or so between each piece so that I can cut them out. But I'll lay multiples out at once because my whole iron will fit on that. So I want to talk about something I hear from people a lot. They'll say, well, that stuff doesn't stick. It does, but I'm going to give you the trick. It doesn't stick right away. It's not like ironing on a quick fusible because it's not sticky. It's dry paper. Okay, so I have this iron on the hot setting. The first tip for you is use a hot iron. It does need to be hot, but I mean that should have fused it. They're on there a little bit, but they're not really on there. Okay, use steam. Don't use a ton of steam because this is a water-soluble product. You don't want to steam it to death, but I turned the steam on my iron and I'm going to hit this just a little bit with my steam iron. Okay, and we're going to press that out. All right, so now I've hit it with some steam and look, they don't come off. They're on there really nice and tight. All right, we're going to talk about how we cut those out in a second, but I'm going to give you an extra little tip. With this fabric, so this is going to be my other fabric. Turn this off so you can see the difference. I want to fussy cut these. So I've got my shiny side down on my fabric and I can kind of see that through there, but not great, right? So I'm thinking I'm going to cut out these little bees because look how cute the bees are. If I turn on my light box and I can adjust my light box, this is the back side of the fabric, okay? If I turn on my light box, I can adjust the brightness of it, which I find really handy because this sucker's bright. I'm going to find the shiny side of my hexagon and I'm going to cut out this little bee right here because I think I like bees. Bees are cute. And then maybe we'll do this bee because he's sitting on a flower. And maybe I don't want the bee perfectly centered because I want the flower also. So I'm going to tilt this out here so that I see the bee like that. And then let's do... See if this bee's too close to that one because I need a good distance between them. So let's do this bee. He can also be a little off-centered so that we see the flower. Okay. Now, obviously, I don't want to take my iron and stick it on this expensive light board because that would be terrifying. Instead, I'm going to take my fabric glue stick. Once I've gotten them lined up on my light box, I'll take my fabric glue stick and I'm just going to put a little bit of the glue on the wrong side, the side that goes down on the fabric. I'm just going to glue these down where I decided that I want them. And really, this is just for transportation purposes. Okay, so I'm going to stick those back down there. Just as double insurance so that I don't lose this, I'm going to slide the board out and leave this on the ironing board. But if I'd have done that without gluing those down first, there's no way they would have stayed on there. Now, I mean, they're on there enough that I can move this around and then I can press this down. When I press this, it's going to dry that fabric glue, so I don't have to worry about it showing through or anything. Now again, those are stuck on there. They're stuck on there pretty good just by the hot iron. If you feel like that one's not so great, so if you feel like they're not stuck down enough, go back over it with the iron, hit it with the steam a little bit. Don't steam it so that it gets wet. Just steam it a little bit. And those are stuck down there really nicely. So if you've tried using print and piece and it doesn't stick great for you, try that. All right, now we're going to talk cutting tips. Okay, so I've already cut out and glued my green ones. So I've got my green ones, I've got my center orange and my green, let's call them leaves. I really like using an 1/4 ruler when I'm doing this process. My ADD brain does better with patterns and repetition because then I have less opportunity for distraction. So what I do when I do this is I cut them all, I press them all, I trim them all, I glue them all. I do it like that because the automation steps make it less likely that I'm going to get distracted and not actually do it. So, you know, it's all about coping mechanisms, right? So since we're going to fussy cut these ones, what I did with the green ones, you saw how I just lined them all up. I just cut them all at once. So for the floral ones, I'm going to use my add a quarter ruler because, again, this takes away the possibility for me to get like really squirrely with it. And I just cut them out. Okay, so I will typically separate them from each other with one cut, however that happens, just because I will get into a habit and I'll just start hacking away at it, and then I'll forget that I had this other hexagon over there, and then I'll cut through it. So I try to separate them into usable pieces before I cut all of the shapes. And then once I can get to a place where all I have to do is cut and turn, I can just cut it and turn it and cut it and turn it. So the add a quarter ruler will butt right up to that paper really nicely. Okay, and I just will turn and cut and turn and cut and turn and cut. Okay. If that does not appeal to you and you would rather glue these all on and then sit in your recliner and watch cartoons and do this by hand, by all means. I am the last person to discourage anyone from watching cartoons. So you can do this by hand. Again, my brain does better with automation. So I like to do it all, you know, the same way every time. You can do this with scissors though. You just sort of eyeball 1/4 of an inch. Some people even prefer a wider seam allowance, like 3/8 of an inch. And I have this in a 3/8 of an inch option. I'll show you too. But you can just cut this out. It doesn't have to be perfect. Because of the technique we're going to use, this doesn't have to be perfect. I just prefer having to not think about it. Okay? So, we have all of our shapes cut out. The next step is our handy dandy Quilter Select glue stick. I have told you guys a million times why this is my favorite glue stick. This is going to be just another one of those times. So we're going to put a little bit of glue on the paper. Glue one side, turn it, glue the next side. Make sure that when you're turning to the next side, you're putting glue on the fabric, not only the paper. Because you want the glue to, or the fabric to stick to itself in those corners. And it doesn't matter if it gets like out on the edge and it gets on your fingers a little bit. When this glue dries, it's clear. So you're not going to see this crazy neon yellow on the edge of your piece. Look at the cute little bee. Isn't he sweet? Okay, so we're going to do this with all of our pieces, and then we're going to, you know, do the thing that you're all here for and show you how to join these together by machine. So let me go get my machine set up. Okay, so we're going to talk a couple of tips about machine setup. First, I have a brand new size 70 Microtex needle in my machine. Microtex is a little bit finer needle. It's got a longer, sharper point to it, so it doesn't make quite as large of a hole. If you want to get really serious about this, get a 60 Microtex needle. Now, I need you to hear this next part. If you use a 60 needle, you also need to communicate to yourself in some way not to use your needle threader, okay? This is how I do it for myself. A 60 needle is too small for your needle threader to go through. You will break it. Let me say that again. If you're using a 60 or anything smaller than a 70 size needle in your machine, don't use your needle threader. Cusco says so, okay? Not touchy. And honestly, I'm using monofilament thread. It's so fine that probably 9 times out of 10, okay, so let's say 5 times out of 10, your needle threader probably isn't going to thread it anyway because it's such a fine thread that the needle threader can't quite get it through the hole. So you might just have to get used to threading your needle because we're going to use this monopoly or monopoly, depending on how you say it, monofilament thread in the top. I do have an 80 weight polyester thread in the bottom. I have a white polyester 80 weight thread in the bottom. This is what I use most of the time if I'm doing something that doesn't have to match. So if the thread on the top doesn't have to match the thread on the bottom, like when I'm doing embroidery, this is the thread that I have in my bobbin most of the time. Okay. Now let's talk stitch. The stitch that I like to do, this is just me, but the stitch that I like to do, you can use any of these zigzag stitches, but my favorite one for doing this particular technique is this stitch right here. It's called a couching stitch. The reason I like it is because it takes little wide jumps from the right and the left, but it also stitches down the middle. So if there's a decorative stitch in your machine that has those elements, then use it. I mean, there's not really a right or wrong. You can also use this stitch here, which is called a hem stitching stitch. Same idea. You want things that have stitches down the middle, but that jump from the right to the left on both sides. Here's another one. This is another hem stitching stitch. This is a really pretty one too. All of these hem stitching stitches are going to work. Okay, I'm going to use the most basic one. This is the one I use most of the time, this couching stitch. Here's the real truth to this. You're using a clear thread. It probably doesn't even matter that much. The reason I like this one is once I get this stitched on here, you can't see it. It's really cool. All right, so let's start sewing. Set my camera over here so you guys can see what's happening. We're going to use an open-toed foot. This is my J foot, so I can see through it. If your machine has a pivot feature or a knee lift, these things are going to be helpful to you. I encourage you to engage them. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is take this orange one is my center. So I'm going to butt one of these green ones to one of the orange ones. It lines up perfectly because I used a template that matches. Okay, I'm going to take these over to the middle. I'm going to drop my foot down. You want to make sure that they are kissing all the way up the hem or all the way up the seam. Frogger, can you get off my foot pedal, please? Excuse me. Move your body. Thank you. Okay. You can do a tie-off stitch. If you are working with a machine that has a tie-off stitch, good for you. That's super handy. We like that. You also want to have a foot that you can recognize the center of the foot. So see how my J foot has this little line right down the middle? There's a reason that this is the foot that's on the machine when you get it. It is probably the most versatile foot you're going to use. But for this technique, I like using it because I can see where the center of my decorative stitch is going to be. I'm going to do a tie-off stitch on one side. Now I'm not changing the length or the width of my stitch because I want you to see what it looks like straight out of the machine. Then you can play with that. You can alter it a little bit. Okay, and then I'm just going to stitch right down that middle. And I like for my needle to go as close to the middle as possible. It doesn't have to go in the crack. Again, we're using clear thread. It doesn't have to be wonderfully perfect. Okay, so now we have stitched those two together. Personally, that stitch is a little wide for me. I think the length is okay, but it's a little bit wide because look at how far it jumps into one side or the other. That tiny little hole right there is the edge of your thread. So I'm going to shrink mine down to about 3, probably 2.5. And then I'm going to shrink the length down as well to 0.8. Now you'll notice I left my needle down because now I can just go ahead and put the next one on. So here's my cute little bee. I'm going to butt my little bee up in that corner right there. Now at this point I have a point. This is a Y. You pick which way you want to go. Personally, I will attach all of them around the center before I do the sides. That being said, I don't want this to wiggle. So I'm going to hold this still. I'm going to use a bit of my pink tape. And I'm going to pink tape the sides I'm not sewing down. Here's your next hot tip. Don't sew through pink tape. Your needle does not like it. That's not its purpose. It is not a sew through me kind of tape. So then we're going to turn our corner and we're going to stitch this side on. And you can see how once you get a rhythm, you can just keep on trucking with this, right? So I'm going to take another piece of pink tape and my green. Next I'm going to put a green one on. Gonna wiggle that in there so that it's butted up right there and that this side is butted up nicely as well. Put a bit of tape on. Now I use this pink tape over and over again, so I'll do like 5 pieces of tape for each flower garden block, but then I just take them off and I use them again because they stay sticky for a while. So you could do probably a couple dozen of these blocks and not get new tape. Okay, so we're going to sew the next seam. We're going to leave our needle down, put our next block on, another bit of tape. Okay, and we're just going to keep building to this as we go around the block. Make sure that everything's straight and just keep going around the corner. Next is a green one. Oops, don't want that in there. And the tape really holds it in place until you get where you want to be. I really do love that pink embroidery tape for all kinds of things. And then the last one is another little bee. We're going to put the flower side down. I'm going to put my last piece of tape on. Turn my corner. Now when I get to the end of this piece, instead of stopping and taking it out, I'm going to turn and stitch my last, stitch this one petal closed. I'm just going to keep taking stitches until I get right there in that middle crack. Okay, and then I'm going to turn this way and I'm going to stitch this one closed. You can do a tie-off stitch if you like. Honestly, you're probably going to stitch those other pieces down. You're going to stitch these to other things. It goes really quickly. Once you get a rhythm, the rhythm stays easy. Now, I'm going to leave that tape on there. Come to the next one that I know is open. I'll take a few stitches and then I'll pull the tape off because now it's anchored. And I just always have little pieces of pink tape stuck on the side of my machine all the time that I can go and use for all kinds of things. Okay. So we're just going to keep going around the circle until we get all of these pieces sewn together. Now, if you want to see the settings I have for my machine, I am using a couching stitch, width 3.0, length 0.8. And this is what my block looks like. Okay, so you can't hardly see these stitches because it's clear thread. You can see right there, let's see, on the bottom right is when I did the wider stitches. All I have left to do now is I'm going to trim off these little threads, these little clear threads that are on there. And now I have a whole block left, or ready to go. So you see how you could just sit here and just zone out and stitch these together and then make bigger things. If you wanted to stitch this on, you just want to practice it and try it out on something, you could stitch this, you could applique this right onto something else, a pillow or a tote bag pocket or a jacket or something. But it's kind of instant gratification. The other beautiful thing is that this washes out. So you don't have to remove this paper at all. If you're going to make a quilt, you quilt right through this. You don't need to take it out. And I have used it in lots of projects. It works brilliantly. All right, so let's talk about the products we used. So there we go. I trimmed my little threads off. I gave it a final little press. That looks pretty cool, right? And I started making this video 25 minutes ago. So even with all of the talking and the demoing and the whatnot, this took 25 minutes. So if you made up a bunch of things and you threw them in a bucket and you had them laying around or whatever, and you just wanted to sit and sew on something, this is a great little warm-up project. I like to have warm-up projects where my brain doesn't really have to think about stuff. So sometimes I'll have a little bucket of something I'm working on. This would be a great thing to just have a little bucket next to your machine of just a bucket full of these made up. And then you sew 7 of them together and you got a flower. And when you got enough flowers that you can make a couple of blocks, put those together. It's kind of a quick build. This, incidentally, great way to use up some of those things from your PhD projects that you are no longer in love with, or you've got scraps laying around, or you've got fabric that was for a thing that you changed your mind about. Make up a bunch of these and just leave them in a bucket and have them to the side. All right. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, the item numbers are above my head. If you're watching on YouTube, you can just go to our website. You can type in those numbers. The item will come up. You can buy it from there. If you are watching this on Facebook, you can comment the word sold, space, and the number that's in the parentheses, and you can buy it like that. If you're watching this in the app, buy now is right below me. If I could find my list. Oh, here we go. We're going to talk about the items that we demoed in today's video, and you can go ahead and just pick those up right now. The first thing, obviously, is the Print and Piece Light. Stock number is 101352. This is a package of 25 sheets, so you can make quite a few things out of one package. Best 20 bucks I have ever spent when it comes to English paper piecing. Number 110527 is the super great size Kai scissors. Kai scissors stay sharp for a really long time. They're nice and tight. I hate when I'm using a pair of scissors that are kind of wobbly in the screw. These are nice and tight. They stay tight. They stay tight for a long time. They also flex a little bit. So the plastic in the handle flexes just a little. So you don't get that tired finger from your finger rubbing against the hard plastic as much. So these are the 5.5 inch. We have lots of sizes on our website, but this is the one we talked about today. 110527. We also talked about the super fabulous Alex Anderson Quilter Select Glue Stick. I know I talk about this all the time, but honestly, it's one of those must-have sewing tools. It's like the salt to your pepper, right? So, glue stick is number 103163. If you already have the glue stick, but you're running out of glue, the refills are number 101415. There are 4 in each package. They just fit right on inside this tube. If you happen to have a different brand of glue stick, most of the other brands of glue stick, these will fit in. So if you have one that has a blue lid or you have one that has a pink lid, these will probably fit in there. Okay. Then we talked about the clear thread. This is the thread that I use. This is called Monopoly. It's by Superior. It is a polyester monofilament. So it's not as shiny as some of the ones that are on the market. It doesn't stretch as much. So if you've ever tried to sew with some of the clear threads we've had in the past, they stretch like elastic. And so over time, they don't stay as tight. And they also will break a lot in your needle because the stretch happens in the tension and it just doesn't like it. Also, if you have the kind of machine where your thread spools off the top, sometimes it gets a little slippery. There's a little net inside here that you put on top of the spool so that it comes off smoothly. Incidentally, if you have some thread that does that to you, I have just the nets on my website. So Monopoly is number 103303. This also comes in a smoke color. So if you are doing this with a darker color fabric and you don't want it to be as shiny, smoke color kind of fixes that. Next, we talked about the value of a Microtex needle. This is a size 70 Microtex. This is number 105259. They're a package of 5 needles. If you're feeling frisky, you can also get Microtex 60 on our website. Again, get you the Cuzco sticker and don't touch the needle threader. Okay? Those were our needles. If you're curious about what I have in my bobbin, this is number 101351. White pre-wound bobbins, black pre-wound bobbins. I think there's 20 in here. Yes, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, 20 pre-wound bobbins. Here's the thing, you can reuse these bobbins. They're a pretty standard size for Janome, Brother, Baby Lock, those kind of machines. They have changed the way these are packaged now. So the ones I have in stock right now, you get the bobbin saver ring for free basically, because they've stopped putting them in the blue bobbin holder. But I bought up all that they had because I really like this bobbin saver, because it holds all your regular size bobbins. Okay, so this is what I have in my machine right now. This one's number 101351. Really good deal, by the way, because not only do you get 20 bobbins, which will cost you about 20 bucks empty, but now they're full of thread. Then we talked about the add a quarter ruler. Okay, so the add a quarter ruler is number 102312. This is the 12-inch size. When you're doing small pieces like this, the 6-inch size is probably handier because you don't have to deal with such a long ruler. This is just the one that I had that I was showing in the demo, but I do also have a 6-inch one on the website. If you prefer to have a wider seam allowance, it also comes as at a 3/8. So the ledge that's over here is just a little bit wider. Some people, when they do English paper piecing, like to have a wider seam allowance to stitch around. This was the answer to that. Okay, so this one's number 108323. All right, that is what I have to show you. If you are completely against the idea of English paper piecing by hand, give this a try. I think you'll like it. It's kind of instant gratification, and especially if you want to make something that's just a little decor element, you want to make a pillow, you want to make some small project, and you want to do it quick. Seriously, it took me 15 minutes. Okay, go try it. Night night.